Speculation over potential Dishonored 3 arose after co-creator Harvey Smith confirmed he is working with Arkane Studios on a new game. Neither a title nor a release date has been revealed, but the overwhelming response from the fans of the Dishonored franchise sparked by this morsel of hope shows the interest is still there and thriving. And I am no exception to this. With little to nothing to go on that is confirmed, imagination runs wild with what to expect next from this franchise. Most importantly, what story is left to be told. Viewers beware, this video is ridden with spoilers for all preceding games in the Dishonored franchise. Following the pattern of the first two games, there is appeal to seeing a middle-aged Emily taking on the starring role, 15 years after the events of Dishonored 2. However, there is much evidence to support that the writers have put the Kaldwin story to rest after the second game. Most damningly so, when Jessamine's soul was released from the heart Corvo and Emily carried around to serve as a guide. In argument for this decision, all three characters have been through enough, though hopefully any game in the future gives us hints as to how the Empress and her father are doing. However, two of the biggest mistakes the franchise could make would be making this game an open world, following the trend of most modern games, and introducing a new cast of characters. So without our beloved Emily or Corvo, who's left to follow? DLC's Knife of Dunwall and Brigmore Witches followed the story of Dowd, Corvo's narrative foil. Unfortunately, Dishonored's writers have ended Dowd's story with an unavoidable canonical death in Death of the Outsider. And while Delilah has only ever appeared as a villain in the series, it's safe to say after being defeated twice, 3 times is a little difficult to justify, negating the possibility of seeing her again as well, which depletes most of the main cast we are used to seeing, all except one, Billy Lurk. The most recent installment in the Dishonored franchise was the Death of the Outsider DLC, in which Billy Lurk was the playable main character. Whether the player chose the high chaos or low chaos ending to the game, the point stands that there is no longer an outsider at the end of the DLC. This action permanently changes the magic system of the universe, while not spelling out how. Without the outsider, what happens to those he marked? It can be assumed they lose their powers, as it's unlikely Emily could find ease in her role as Empress while still wielding powers from the void. But Billy Lurk isn't one of outsiders marked. While her powers are tied to the void, suggested to be from a source older than the outsider himself, she never made a deal with the outsider, and therefore doesn't bear his mark. The final ending slideshow reveals Billy with her arm and eye, her sources of power still intact, suggesting that Billy is immune to these changes. As who very well could be the last person with powers in this universe, Billy makes a strong candidate for our playable lead. And who wouldn't want another game with Rosario Dawson lending her talented voice to? And imagine this time the heart's tool that serves as a guide with Dowd's voice inside, now that he, like Jessamine, is a departed loved one. Yet she could be joined by her latest apprentice. While Dishonored offers ample choices between the downright gruesome to the merciful, it has always moved forward with the low chaos plot in mind, meaning Outsider is alive after the Death of the Outsider DLC, but now he is human. Much about the Outsider's storyline in the DLC mirrors what we know of Billy and her relationship with her mentor, Dowd. Billy was 15 when Dowd took her on as his apprentice. Outsider was revealed to have been 15 when the cultists kidnapped and sacrificed him, turning him into the god that rules over the void. He has aged none since his transformation and knows less about being human now than he did before. So it's safe to say the outsider reverts to being 15. Even the scene of the kill/spare choice matches nearly frame by frame with the one Dowd has with Billy at the end of Knife of Dunwall. Ignoring for a moment Dishonored's love of mirroring plots, it's safe to say Billy doesn't go through all of the trouble of sparing Outsider from his torturous existence in the void to toss him back onto the streets alone where his own naivety could quickly kill him. And again, how magic works post-Outsider in the Void is yet to be determined. Perhaps Outsider might continue to have residual powers from being connected to the Void for so long. This would offer the player a similar choice to the one at the start of Dishonored 2, where the choice is given to play as either one of two characters, offering a slightly different storyline depending on the decision, as well as different powers to navigate the world with. This time the choice being either to play as Billy or Outsider. But it's possible the universe-altering choice writers made at the end of Death of the Outsider means magic no longer exists. Therefore, writers aren't planning on moving forward in the timeline past that point, which offers yet another possibility, a prequel. Again, the worst decision for writers to make is to try to introduce a new main character fans aren't familiar with. The limit is to who we already know and who bears Outsider's mark, which in this universe is told to be rare. There is one candidate not yet mentioned who bears Outsider's mark and remains mostly unexplored, Granny Rags. Granny Rags, aka Vera Moray, is one of the most compelling characters from the first Dishonored game, and not to mention voiced by Susan Sarandon. At the time we first meet her, she is elderly, deeply invested and twisted by her arcanic bond to the void, but we learn that Vera Moray used to be a wealthy heiress and the most desirable bachelorette in Gristol, a stark contrast to who she ends up being. Dishonored has many recurring themes throughout all of its installments, but the most prominent one is power and its relation to corruption. What character better represents this fall under lust for power than Granny Rags? We don't know why the Outsider chose to give her his mark in the first place. We don't know how she went from being a socialite to boiling a man alive for his bones. We do know she's enamored with the Outsider and she practices tabooed witchcraft in her later age, but we don't yet know the process of how she became Granny Rags. The only other compelling storyline Dishonored could take without entirely shifting focus to an unfamiliar character. As for setting, both major installments offer a vastly different environment. We are first given a rainy, gloomy, and highly polluted Gristol, with influences in design drawn from Victorian-aged England. The second game is instead based around Corvo's place of origin, Karnaca, sunny and hot, inspired by Cuba. Most wisely, the setting should again be different for flavor, and showing us yet another vibrant location of the Isles. Tivia, for example, which has been suggested to be cold and tundra-esque. Others speculate the game might depart from the Isles entirely, instead exploring Pandacia, the main land separate from the Empire, of which little is known. Overall, Dishonored would be wisest to take something familiar to long-term fans and expand upon it, much like they have in the installments succeeding the first Dishonored game. Whether moving forward, navigating a newly changed world with characters we've grown to love, or returning to an earlier timeline before the first game to elaborate on an intriguing yet underrepresented character, there are still stories within the Dishonored universe to be told. Only time will tell what Arkane Studios chooses to do with it.